Welcome to Becoming Church, the podcast where we discuss how the message and movement of Jesus is not just about becoming Christians, but about becoming the church. I'm your host, Kristen Mockler-Young, and my guest today is Shannan Martin, who is an author and community advocate. She is a cheerleader for people that most of the world overlooks, and she's going to help us see these people in our lives differently through this conversation. Shannon also ran for city council last year, so she's going to give us a little sneak peek behind the curtain about politics and how we can navigate this upcoming election. Here's my interview with Shannan Martin. All right, Shannon, welcome to the Becoming Church podcast.
Good morning.
So glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I have followed you for years and years. I honestly don't even know how I first was introduced to your platform, social media. That's how long I've been following you.
Yep.
And we have a connection back to Northern Indiana,
Yes.
where you live, because I have family there. But I think a lot of our listeners, I know our church is in the South. A lot of our listeners are in the South. So what is life like? You can talk about weather or just life in general, but clue us into like a little picture of your corner
Yeah.
of the Midwest.
Yeah, I would love to. So yes, I love my community. I write a lot about it. I talk a lot about it. So yeah, we live in Goshen, Indiana. It's a very small city right up by the Michigan line. So a lot of times, I mean, none of us are great at geography, but people will often assume like, oh, hey, I'm coming to Indy. Can I see you? And I'm like, I am 3 hours away from Indy.
Right.
Indiana's a tall state. So I'm way at the top. And my family moved into this neighborhood in Goshen almost 14 years ago. And that's just been like a really pivotal part of my story and part of what really started to kind of shift me and shift our family into some new directions. But yeah, I mean, right now it's, we're at the very tail end of, I guess we're technically in spring. It doesn't feel like spring here yet. We got a couple inches of snow on Monday. That was unexpected and
Oh my
not
gosh.
welcomed at all.
Yes. Yep.
So it's just a little like the trees are all still bare. The grass is still kind of brown. Like it's not a cute time to be in Northern Indiana, but
Yeah.
give us a month. Give us a month. But yeah, I
Yes.
mean, Goshen, it's an interesting city with interesting roots. It's complicated. Um, it's like kind of picture perfect in some ways and really messy in other ways. And we love it.
Oh, like most places, I would think. There's the good
Absolutely.
and the bad.
Yes. If you spend enough time and pay close enough attention anywhere, you're going to see like complexity. And I think that's always the thing that we should be kind of keyed into and paying attention to.
Sure. Have you always lived in Goshen or at least in Northern Indiana?
No, I grew up in southwestern Ohio, like near
Okay.
Dayton. Yeah,
Okay.
so I
I
came
have
up
family on
to
the other side in Dayton. Look at us.
Oh, of course you do. Yeah, I came up to Indiana for college. That's where Corey and I met. And he's he's not from Goshen, but he's from a very a community very near to Goshen, and so this is more
Okay.
kind of his stomping grounds. But I've been in Indiana. I mean, we had a short detour through Washington D.C. when we were early married, but other than that, I've been in Indiana since college, so it's home for sure.
Okay. You love it there. And you have how
Yeah,
many kids?
we have 4.
4 kids now.
Yep.
That are getting
So we have
older.
they're all getting
Oh my
older. I mean,
gosh.
just this morning I had a conversation with one of my kids like, "Hey, I would like to see your face more." Like as they were leaving, like we're just in that phase of like everybody's running around and when they're not, they're in their rooms doing their things and
Yeah.
I miss them. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
our oldest he's like off and grown and on his own. He's 30 and he lives
What?
I don't yeah,
Oh my
all of
gosh.
our kids were adopted. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's that. And he's the newest
Still.
into our family. Um, yeah, I mean, but technically I am old enough
Yeah.
to be his mother.
Yes.
But it's wild when he just turned 30 in January and he lived with us, I don't know, 12 years ago when he first came into our family. And I just remember him saying, like, he thought we were so old then. And now I'm like, you're getting close to the age we were when you thought we were really old. So I don't know what that makes you,
Right.
but it makes me even older. So yeah, he's with his family in Elkhart close by. We see them all the time. And then we have our Calvin is in college at Purdue in his first year.
Okay.
And then we have 2 in high school still. So Ruby is a junior, Silas is a freshman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. And my kids are still younger. We're still in the elementary phase of life. You've
Yeah.
definitely
Just
moved into the high
wait.
school and college. Yes.
Yes. It's just a different world. I love it. I
Right.
mean, I love having older kids. I love having teenagers, but it's like it's like I have never given birth to a baby, but you
Mm,
hear people talking about like, that pregnancy kind of really prepares you for motherhood in some ways.
yeah.
And I feel like the years that I'm in now are preparing me to be an empty nester. Like they're just moving further out, and it's
Yeah.
natural and it's good and it's healthy and it's still hard. It's like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
celebrate it in some ways and you mourn it in other ways. So, yeah.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair for every season or every transition, not
Yeah,
just parenthood, right? But you're like,
for
all right, well,
sure.
I'm trying to be present in this one while also preparing for the next one.
Yeah.
Sometimes kind of looking back at what was at the same time,
Yes. Yeah, just
you
trying to
know?
carry the complexity of that, like, holding the grief and the longing and the beauty and the celebration. And I mean, it's a lot to hold, but it's like that's like an abundant way to live, to try to just keep your hands out and hold on to all of it.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing about your family, so thank you for sharing about
Yeah,
them.
of
But
course.
also, what I really love about you and why I've really loved following you for so long is your heart for your community. And you love your community so much that you actually ran for city council. And I want to get to that. We're going to get to
Yeah.
that story. But first, I want to back up and kind of know how you got there. And so
Okay.
I read on your Substack last fall, you were sharing a story about when you were a kid, you had been canvassing, right? Like
Mhm.
in poor neighborhoods as a youth
Yeah.
group kid.
Yep.
Will you explain kind of what canvassing is for people maybe that don't
Right.
know, and then what kind of messaging that taught you when it came to other people and how you interact with them?
Yeah. Yeah. That the word canvassing was like when I was in youth group, in my teenage years, that's the word that they used for going door to door witnessing. And
Mhm.
even the word witnessing is like such a word that it's so specific to like a subset of Christianity even. And that's,
Yeah.
my husband and I both, we didn't grow up near each other, but very evangelical backgrounds. And so the language is very of witnessing was very common and known.
Uh-huh.
Canvassing was like trotted out only when on the days that we were going to go do that door to door thing. And I don't know the roots of that word, and I
Okay.
always thought like, what in the world? Like, why are we like bringing out this new weird word for this very specific thing we're doing? And then when I ran for city council and we had to go door to door, knocking on doors, we called it the same thing. So that's what kind of connected
Yeah.
those two events, I guess, in my mind. Um, and yeah, we would, I've been on missions trips, and I have all kinds of feelings, and there's all kinds of nuance and things we could say about a lot of
Sure.
these things.
Yeah.
But at that time in my life, we even went on a missions trip and went door to door, telling people about Jesus. That was kind of the idea
Mhm.
behind it. And I hated it. I was so uncomfortable. It felt so weird. I just remember
Same.
wanting, like, praying that people would not answer the door,
Yes.
and I'm sure they were on the other side of the door praying that we would just go away and not, a lot of people didn't answer the door.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I started to kind of notice, probably more in adulthood, in reflection, as I'm
Mhm.
thinking back, I don't know if I ever would have fully put this together at the time. I don't remember, but we almost always went to under resourced neighborhoods. We were not
Mhm.
going to like suburban areas. We were not going to like the cute cul-de-sacs,
Yeah.
the subdivisions. We were never doing. I never, never. We went to very specific places, and so what that kind of instilled in me, though
Mhm.
I'm sure nobody ever said this directly, but this idea that people who were materially poor lacked Jesus,
Yeah.
that these were people who specifically needed Jesus, and that we could safely make the assumption that there was a good chance they didn't already have a relationship
Mm.
with Jesus.
Mhm.
And so it connected this idea of, material poverty or material lack, or just, being more under resourced, with the idea of sin, honestly. Like this
Wow.
idea of being sinful in some way or separated from God in some way, lacking some knowledge that me as a 15-year-old claimed to
Right.
have,
Right.
like, I mean, and so, yeah, I
Who
mean,
still
I
lived
think
at
it's
home with parents and like
totally,
not providing for
totally.
yourself and yeah.
No, I mean, And just was yeah, I mean, just that dynamic alone, I think is pretty problematic. And I think my body was telling me, in my anxiety, in my like, I don't want to do this, but this is
Yeah.
part of what helps me belong in this community. This is what is
Yeah.
required of me. So I have to pretend like I'm cool with it. I mean,
Right.
I think that was my body alerting me to like something's off here. Like, let's pay
Yeah.
attention to this. But I
Yeah.
didn't have the tools to do that, especially not at that age.
Well, and especially when you're taught, I have similar experiences. I remember even in college doing it, and they made us go walk around the quad, and it was like a challenge. Like, this is going to grow your faith
Yes.
and grow your spiritual
Yes.
muscle, and you just have to talk to everybody because the one person that you walk past might be the person that
Yeah.
needs. And I just remember same feeling so uncomfortable, and I
Yeah.
think I didn't have the words either, but I think it was something in me knew, like, we're not going about this the right way, but I'm being
Yeah.
taught
Yeah.
to be a good Christian, to show my faith, to show God that I'm serious
To
about
prove it. Yeah.
following exactly, then this is what we have to do.
Yeah.
Do you think, Shannon, that there was a loose, like, prosperity gospel tie-in here where, like, if you brought Jesus to these, quote
Yeah.
unquote poor people, that you could then
Yeah.
save them from a life of poverty?
Prosperity gospel was woven in throughout my upbringing in various ways. And,
Yeah.
part of that was just like different different seasons of our life and different churches that we were a part of. I spent time like actively as a kid, actively a part of prosperity gospel churches. And so it all
Mhm.
kind of muddies together a little bit in
Mhm.
my mind. But I think, yeah, I think there's still threads. I mean, not even threads. I mean, I think prosperity gospel is still pervasive in so
Yeah.
much of our theology. I think it's so present that we don't even always notice those connections. But
Yeah.
100%, I think that was part of what was happening.
Growing up, canvassing or just in your religious experience, evangelical, what was the narrative that you remember about people? Like, what was the narrative that
Hmm.
you took away
Yeah.
about, like, this is people in the world?
Yeah. I believed that there were good people and bad people and that I
Mhm.
was mostly good.
Mhm.
That is
Okay.
like my overarching, and again, I don't imagine that anybody ever framed it quite in that way, but I was always taught, you know, warned against bad influences. That was language that was really
Uh-huh.
really present throughout my childhood at home with my parents who were doing the best with what they had, but
Yep.
that was part of it. That's the way they were being kind of taught and
Yeah.
discipled, the churches around me. And so it was this kind of like, you stay, like stays with like, whatever that might mean, and it can mean
Right.
100 different things, but like we stick with what we know. We're
Mhm.
safer when we're with
Mhm. Mhm.
people like us. So any type of difference is a separation, and like depending on the difference, like you want to keep distance, but depending on what the difference was, you might keep even more distance. It was just this,
Yeah.
but then add in the complexity. And I remember this feeling like it didn't make sense to me when I was younger. Add in the complexity that we were supposed to be, salt and light in the world.
Right.
We were supposed to
Right.
be witnessing to people while also maintaining a safe distance, while also
Yes.
being kind of wary and skeptical of the people around
And
us, but
afraid.
like,
Right.
and afraid for sure, and judging them at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And yet we're supposed to be loving them and inviting them to church with us
Right.
and shaming them in some ways, which
Right.
I actively participated
Uh,
in high
who
school. I
didn't?
cannot
Yes.
believe I had any friends. Yeah,
Yay for the grace of God, right?
yeah, I mean, kids, I went to a really small, little, tiny public school, and we went to K through 12 together, and we had all kinds of grace for each other. But I look back on that time, like, not only am I embarrassed by a lot of it, but I'm also just like, you know, feeling like tender towards my younger self who was
Mm,
given all of these competing tasks.
yeah.
And then it's attached to my belonging within the community of faith, and then it is, like it just feels so precarious. It's so much pressure.
Yeah.
I didn't even understand my own faith, but I had to constantly pretend like I was certain about everything at all times. Like, it's just too much.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah. And identity too. I mean, belonging was a big part of it, but also
Yes.
it was like, because you are a Christian,
Yeah.
this is the most important thing about you. And so therefore, everything else, you know, we don't
Yeah.
even know who we are. Our brains are not fully functioned and formed yet, but yet here
Yes.
we are trying to
I
reflect
look
Christ to the world, you know.
That's right. I look at my 15-year-old. I have a 15-year-old right now, and imagining my child being tasked with saving other people, and like, it's just, it doesn't, I'm just trying to get him to come out of his bedroom now and then, like, hang out with me. Like, it's just it's wild to look back on that. And I was in the thick of, like, the world I was in was also like high level of end times
Oh, yes. Oh,
stuff.
yes.
Like, so
Yeah.
there was that layer of, like, we're constantly in the end times, and, like, this certain date and this certain date. And I mean, that was very activated within my family, within my larger family, within my community.
Yeah.
Um, like the Left Behind series, like all
Oh,
of
yeah.
these, like the Satanic Panic, like that was my whole childhood. It was a
Same.
lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think the fear, right? The fear of it all. I was just having a conversation with somebody yesterday about secular things. Cause for me, that was, you
Yes.
mentioned like the good and the bad. For me, if it was secular, it was bad. And if it was
Yes.
churchy, it was good. And it was that easy. Right. And I came
Yes.
to the realization, I was like, I really think that what happened was we were afraid, or maybe our parents were afraid, or the church was afraid because they didn't trust God within us. I think there was
Yeah.
that fear of like, if you listen to this music, you're going to get pulled away. Or if you
Yeah.
read this book, or if you watch MTV, or whatever it was,
Mhm.
that God within us, Holy Spirit within us, is not powerful enough, cannot be
Right.
trusted enough, that your
Right.
salvation is still going to be okay. And looking back now, I'm like, that's bananas, you
It
know?
really is. It really is. I mean, even when I said a moment ago, the feeling, like trusting the feeling in my body. I mean, I would say as a Christian person, a Christ follower, that is Holy Spirit within me.
Yeah.
However, I was taught to actively distrust my feelings, my
Mm-hmm.
body, my intuition, my gut. Like, all of that was like, that is woo woo, that is dangerous, that is secular. Um,
Yeah.
and just as a side note, you just reminded me of this. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but my best friend, who I was in youth group together through high school, and she's still one of my best friends. We live close to each other now.
I love that.
We made a list. We had a running list. We lost it, and we're so sad about it. But we made a running list of the things that were described as secular at church. So, I mean, because we had
Like
like
what?
pastors, I mean, everything. I remember at one
Anything,
point
right?
somebody, everything could be secular. So secular music. I mean, the list got long. At some point, a pastor somewhere in our history mentioned a secular Bible. And I just remember clearly us writing that on the list, like, what is happening here?
You're like,
But
okay, stay away from me.
that was such a key word. I love that you
Yep.
brought that up because I have not thought about that in so long. But that was the divide. Secular
Yeah.
music was like, we spent half of our youth group experience being,
Hmm.
warned against
Right.
that. It's
Bringing in
wild.
your CDs or tapes or whatever it was. Did
Yeah,
you guys do
burning
that?
them,
Yeah.
pulling them out. My Sarah and I,
Breaking
the
them.
same friend, we made a mixtape to go on a youth group trip once to listen to, and it was full of secular music, but on the like, we dubbed it off of the radio, and
Uh-huh.
on the little card where you wrote the songs, we made up fake Christian sounding names of every song in case our youth pastor found it.
That's
It was
incredible.
it was ridiculous. Yeah. The hoops we jumped
Oh,
through. Yeah.
that's the list that we need to see. You need to find
I
that.
know. Oh,
That's
I wish I
amazing.
could. If I ever do, I'll holler.
Good. Oh my gosh. All right. So I want to know, being that this was your childhood and this was your
Yeah.
narrative, now that you're a mom and you've got kids that you've
Yeah.
raised through various stages of life, how did you raise and develop them differently so that they would have a
Yeah.
different outlook and see people in a different way?
When we chose to move our family into this neighborhood, our Robert, our oldest, was not a part of our family yet. We had three little
Hmm.
kids,
Hmm.
preschool, kindergarten, second grade. And we had moved out of a community that was much more similar to the communities both my husband and I grew up in, like very homogenous. And we came to understand, like, both of us grew up in places where everybody around us looked, lived, and believed like us.
Yeah.
And so that's cozy. in some ways,
Right.
right? Like
It feels safe. Yeah.
if you've been raised to doubt or distrust or be fearful of difference, that's where you need to live. And we
Yeah.
did. And we really believed at that time that that's where we would stay. And then we didn't stay there long at all. We moved over here into a much more complicated neighborhood,
Okay.
into a neighborhood that is rich in difference and diversity in every possible way. Um,
But
my husband Corey transitioned out of his career, and he worked in federal politics. We both did early on. He for longer than I did. So he transitioned out of that work and became the chaplain of the county jail, which is work he still does now and loves. And our lives just suddenly looked different in almost
yeah.
every, like on almost every metric. Our lives looked different, and to most of the people around, like from our former communities, they looked worse. Like it
Oh,
wasn't just that they
yeah.
were different. It was
Like,
like,
what are you
what, you guys
doing?
have lost your
Yeah.
minds. I mean, we faced a lot of pushback and a lot of relational fallout, and that we had moments of self doubt along the way because it was so
Mm-hmm.
pervasive.
Sure.
Um, and so that was a defining moment for our family. And looking back over time, I mean, this is stuff I like to think about, stuff I'm asked about. The only thing I know for sure, like part of me is always like, none of us knows how anything is going to shake out in the end. I don't know
Sh-
what my kids are going to take away from a very unique upbringing. I don't know
Yeah.
how it's all going to come out. I know that a lot of the stuff that I was taught and raised to believe, I don't, so
Yeah.
we just don't know. But I hope that my kids know that there are not good people and bad people,
Mm.
and that they can very easily put themselves in the good category. I hope that our life and the people we've chosen to surround ourselves with, and the community that we have formed, has taught them and us too, that we are all humans, we are all people, we are all failing, we are
Yeah.
all beloved. um
Mm-hmm.
some of us have struggled in ways other of us have not, but there are not these two camps of people. There is not like a big category of bad influences or secular people, like I thought there were growing up. And so that's all I know. Like that's the one thing I feel somewhat confident of, is that
Yeah.
if my kids don't take anything else away from all of this, I hope they take that.
Yeah. And that's big. That's foundational. That's something too that
Yeah.
my husband and I are trying to raise our girls in, is just the idea of Imago Dei, right? Like
Yeah.
Jesus is in everyone. Every single person is a reflection of the humanity of Christ. And so, yeah, when somebody's mean to you at school, oh, unfortunately, they
Yeah.
also still are a reflection of Christ. When somebody's being mean,
Yeah.
when somebody's being hurtful, when somebody's making a choice that,
Yeah.
hurts somebody else, unfortunately, it doesn't they're making bad choices, things that we wish would be
Yeah.
different, but they're not inherently bad people. Jesus died for them also, loves them also, and
Yeah.
that's a foundation where we can see the humanity of each other and honor the humanity of each other, that I think, you know, permeates into a lot of other areas.
Yeah. And to not put the mistakes on a hierarchy, that
Yes.
like I grew up, rock and roll music, before the time I was secretly listening to it. But
Making
I was
mixtapes, yeah.
right. Like, I mean, secular media in general, drinking beer. I mean, I remember times being in the homes of some of my close friends and seeing like a six pack in their fridge and being instantly terrified.
Oh my
Like,
gosh. I
I'm in
have to leave.
trouble. I'm in
Yeah.
trouble.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Smoking, cussing, like those were the big, like
Yeah.
media, smoking, cussing, drinking. And
Yeah.
those were like the categories of sin that, like, if you saw somebody doing those things, they were bad. They went in the bad category.
Hmm.
And as long as I wasn't doing those four things as a 12-year-old, I got to put myself in the good category and affirm, over time that I still belonged in the good category. And so just even dismantling that, because,
Yeah.
yeah, there are people around us making bad choices or wrong, choices that don't bring them closer to God. And so am
Right.
I. They might just look different.
Right.
They might look like different things. Yeah.
Right.
Or mine might be totally hidden.
Right.
and other things might be more visible and
Yeah.
outward, but I've got my own garbage that I'm dealing with too.
Yeah. Level playing field makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
Yep.
Okay, before we finish the episode, I want to make sure you know that changing your mind is hard, but it's not impossible. I know because I've done it too, and there are still areas in my life that I need to continue to work on changing my mind. I always try to link up additional resources for you in the show notes of each episode. There are messages you can watch, other podcast episodes to listen to, as well as other books that you can read, all related to the topic of conversation. Today, I've got a variety of things for you. There's a message on being salt and light, like Shannon mentioned, as well as an interview with Pastor Rich V. Otis on how to disagree with people without it turning into dislike for them. There are also some other books and things on politics in the church and ways that you can change your mind. If you ever find another resource out there that you think would be helpful, I would love to know about it. You can DM me through Instagram at Kristen Mockler Young, or fill out the form at becomingchurch.tv and send it to me there. All right, now let's learn about running for office with the rest of Shannon's interview. Well, Shannon, last year you ran for city council, and I know a lot of people struggle to even get out and vote in their local elections,
Yes,
let
they do.
alone run in them. So I want to know, what was that experience like for you? Just kind of in general.
It was a beautiful, wonderful, stressful experience. It was not
Fair.
something I ever imagined myself doing ever,
Okay.
and I struggled to get on board with it when I had been asked to consider running years before, and it was an easy no for me, easy.
Okay.
And so this time around, when I was asked to consider again, it was an easy no for me again. And over
Mm-hmm.
time, like they kept calling in more reinforcements, and they finally wore me down because, and I'll say this, I finally found, like, I just was like, this doesn't make sense for me. This does not sound fun to me. It
Yeah.
sounds really hard, like a lot of work.
Yeah.
We had some other just big things going on in our life at that time too. At the point that I was able to connect the dots between the work I do, which we haven't talked about yet, but I work on staff at a community kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a cook, and I've been there for almost 5 years. And when I was able to kind of connect the dots to this community of people who I treasure, who are unheard,
Yeah.
underloved, unrepresented, diminished in so many ways, when I was able to feel like that's my why, like, why would I ever
Mm.
do this? Why does it make sense? I struggled, and I still struggle with the fact that our community is increasingly Latino families, and yet most positions of power and leadership are white. And
Yeah.
so I wrestled through, like, that was a big reason I kept saying no, like, that I we don't need more of me, and we
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
honestly.
Right.
But there were not people in this district willing to kind of step into that yet.
Yeah.
And I still needed to kind of find my reason. And so when I was able to kind of understand that there was a whole community of people living in this city that do not get heard and that deserve to be treasured and beloved, that was my, like, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, it was a lovely experience because I met other like-minded people who were
Yeah.
right here in my community who I had not known before, and so that's always fun.
Yeah.
And I got to spend a lot of time. I mean, I'm an introvert. This stuff is not especially easy or natural for me, but I was forced to go out canvassing to bring that
Again.
word
Yep.
back around. And it was kind of like, made me kind of nervous. But for me, if I could remind myself, like, I'm just meeting more of my neighbors,
Yeah.
that was a win for me. Like, that was the right way to frame it. I'm not selling anything, including Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm just here to kind
Yeah.
of hope to get more people out to vote, because voting, like voter turnout in local elections, is like deplorable, like
Yeah.
20% maybe.
Yeah. Wow.
And so yeah, just getting out there, being part of a team. I mean, in the end, I was disappointed that I lost. I mean, we knew that it was
Sure.
going to be a close one, and my neighborhood is quite divided politically. um and so we did not pull it off. That's always disappointing. I always want to win, especially after
Right.
investing so much time. But I was
Yeah.
able to see that I still like the things that drew me to run in the first place. I can find ways to continue in that work. And that is what it like keyed me into what's happening in this city in a brand new way. I just learned a
Yeah.
lot. And so the people I care about, the things I care about, I just need to find different ways. And maybe in some ways they'll even be more effective ways
Yeah.
of engaging. Yeah.
Talk more about that, Shannon. I know you kind of mentioned the unseen, unvoiced community, not
Hmm.
unvoiced, everyone has a voice, the unheard
Yeah.
community that you wanted to kind of bring awareness to. So even though you didn't win, because
Hmm.
I know you and I know that that's not going to stop you from trying to better your community. So what are you doing now, or what are you going to try to do now? Like what plans
Yeah.
or ideas do you have to still have the effect that you hope to have by
Yeah.
being in office?
I mean, for me, I am particularly interested in homelessness. That's just something that a
Hmm.
lot of our friends at the window face, and I've learned a lot about it. And our community does not care enough. We're a community of Christian people and
Hmm.
churches everywhere, and it's like it bothers me so much that these church buildings are sitting empty for most of the week
Yeah.
while we have neighbors trying to find little alcoves to sleep in. It just should not, it
In
does
the
not have to
snow.
be that
Yeah.
way. It should not be that
Right.
way.
Right.
I went to an event just last night, and I pulled this up on my phone because I don't want to read it wrong. It was through an organization called Strong Towns.
Okay.
So there's just a little plug that I didn't imagine giving, but it was fantastic. And
Oh,
one of the
good.
things he shared was he was talking about kind of innovation and what helps places to change for the better. And he said leadership from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. Leadership from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. And I was sitting there, my supervisor from the kitchen came with me, Crystal, and I just looked over at her like that's the
That's it.
kitchen. I mean, that's us in the kitchen. Like we're a little chaotic. Um and everything about what happens back there probably seems a little chaotic, and it's very bottom up. Like
Hmm.
I just, if we can find, I love the way he phrased that, and I'm going to hold on to that because for me, it's all about finding ways to engage leadership from the bottom, from the ground up. One of the things they talked about was, people living in poverty make some of the best entrepreneurs. So what can we do? Like, how can we facilitate some of these things? Like, I have 100 ideas rolling through my mind, and for me, it's just about paying attention, staying
Yeah.
really rooted in my place, staying connected to the people around me, being a
Hmm.
normal person, who most of the people at work have no idea that I do things like this, like that I write books and sit and talk on podcasts. Like that's just not how I'm known in that
Yeah.
community. And I really like that. I love it. And so my work is to stay connected to them,
Yeah.
to stay connected to people in power also, because I get to
Hmm.
live kind of in that
To go
dual
between.
space.
Yeah.
And if I could be a person that like is able to kind of lock arms between both of those spaces, I don't
Yeah.
know what that will look like, but I am eager to spend my life trying to figure that out.
Oh, that's so beautiful. It's hard to be in the middle of
Yeah.
anything, but I really
Yeah.
think that it's one of the most important places that we can stand, in
Yeah.
connection and trying to move things forward. And I also think that you have this, it seems to be in your writing and things that you have this deep seated belief that people can change. And I think that this
Yeah.
is also part of it. I honestly think that this is what's going to maybe be one of the things that drives you to influence people and change the world. And so you've got books and stories of all kinds of different people that you took a chance on because you were willing to be open to them and
Yeah.
maybe have a willingness to see people in a different way. But I can imagine that as you're canvassing or meeting your
Hmm.
neighbors or just living, life experiences that you run into sometimes some harder, more oppositional people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to engage. So how do you keep holding on to that perception that people can change when you run into
Yeah.
the difficult ones?
Yeah. I am I have sort of an inner fiery personality. So it
Okay.
doesn't always come, and I don't know if this is like an Enneagram space or not, but I'm an Enneagram
It
8.
love it. Okay, that's what I
Okay.
was gonna guess when you said that.
Yes. So that's me. So depending on the level that people know me, some people would guess that and some people would not.
Okay.
But my point in raising that is that I am stubborn. I am really good, and I really see this as I more and more over time see this as a good thing. I'm really good at being angry about the right things, sometimes
Mm,
angry about the wrong things. Like, I have anger is a thing for
sure.
eights, and I feel it. um but I have come to see anger as a gift to me and to the world. And so there's, these are the things, like, I'm good at seeing kind of what's missing.
Mm,
um I The other side of my personality is this persistent and stubborn belief that you articulated. I sometimes forget. Like, if I
yeah.
get too in my kind of mode, I can forget this. I know in my bones that people can change because I know I changed dramatically.
Yes,
And
amen.
so when I reach points of frustration of, like, how are people so wrong about this or that or the other? Or why can we not, come to the same place? Or, just kind of those human moments of, like, what is wrong with people? I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that goes through my mind a lot. And real
Yes,
frustration, and beyond even frustration, but like, I can tend towards cynicism if I'm not really careful,
me
of
too.
just like nothing ever changes, and nothing will ever be better, and whatever bad thing is happening in my
Yeah.
life, it's going to stay bad forever. This really kind of black and white thinking, which we were raised to think that way, right? So we have
Right,
to undo some of that.
right.
If I can take a step back and remember who I was
Mhm.
15 years ago, 10 years ago, I mean 5 years ago, like, if I can
Right.
really reflect on the movement I've made, that is the best reminder to me that people can change. And then I'm more willing to be patient for it. We don't have
Yeah.
to be patient for all kinds of bad behavior. That's not at all what I'm saying. But to be able to see kind of the the kernel of goodness, of grace, of mercy, of whatever it is that feels like it's lacking in that moment, and to remember that we can continually move towards that.
Mm,
That we can change our minds.
right.
We can be curious. Like,
Yeah.
at the point that I realized I could sit down with somebody, and I learned this here in this community. So I was a full grown adult with a bunch of kids, and realized, like, I am allowed to sit and have coffee with someone who is so different from me in some really significant ways. I am,
Yeah.
number one, I am allowed to do that. I am not, there is no guilty by association. There is none of that. and
Right.
and we're taught in our faith, people will say that's true, and then on the other hand, it's like, keep that distance. So even just learning that I could just sit and listen in curiosity, that I was not
Yeah.
going to be fundamentally tainted by that, but also being open to the possibility that, like, God moves through the people around us.
Yeah.
We see God, like you said, we see God reflected through the people around us. I mean, being connected with people coming out of incarceration and
Mhm.
seeing the struggles that they have had, the mistakes they've made, the injustices they've faced,
Yeah.
and to watch how they are actively changing their lives, changing the future for their families. I mean,
Yeah.
people can change.
Right.
I have to remind myself all the time, because it's hard to remember sometimes, but I just know it to be true.
Well, and I think growing up, evangelical, like a lot of us did, even sitting down and having coffee, right? I think a
Yeah.
lot of times it's the idea or the purpose of so that we can change them, so that we can bring Jesus to
Yeah.
them, so that we can have all the answers. But honestly, if we're open to it, it's in those conversations when we're willing to be uncomfortable, when we're willing to hear somebody else's lived experience that we truly cannot relate to. That's when God actually changes us. That's when
Yeah.
he changes our
Yes.
hearts and our minds and gives us the mind of Christ that scripture talks about, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and it's formational. I mean, it's slow work. It's
Yes.
allowed to be, it's supposed to be. It doesn't always look glitzy, or like, it's going to give some great story, or, I think we have to give ourselves permission to be curious, permission for change in ourselves and in others to be very slow, To be able to believe that nothing small is wasted. I heard
Yeah.
somebody, I don't know who this was, but somebody a long, long time ago said, God doesn't change, so we must. And that has stuck with me forever because I've always been kind of conditioned to be afraid of changing. Like you establish your
Right.
certainty and you just cling to that with your whole life and
Right.
nothing ever changes. But if we're supposed to be moving closer to the love of God, the heart of Christ,
Yeah.
that implies movement. And we
Yeah.
don't have to be afraid of that. We just don't.
Let me ask you, Shannon, for someone that's listening that maybe has yet to go through, especially spiritually, any kind of rethinking, unlearning, relearning, changing, and they
Yeah.
still are in a place, they're listening and they're like, okay, well, I do still believe all the same things I believed as a kid, and I haven't changed my
Yeah.
mind, maybe out of fear or, I don't know, the certainty of knowledge, whatever it is. How can you encourage them
Yeah.
into, embracing
Yeah.
curiosity and change and all that?
I would guess that people who might be feeling that way, because I would have been right there with them for so long, I am guessing that they are in pretty homogenous spaces where they are spending time with, surrounded by, listening to, learning from people who are sort of mirror images of them in
Yeah.
certain ways. And so, for my family, it was a little bit different because we physically moved into a new community and into a really special and unique and different community. And for most of
Mm-hmm.
it, for most of us, um, that's not going to be part of this. And I think that's good. And I think it makes it more accessible. It kind of means that none of us is off the hook, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like, well, I'm not moving, so this is what it is. What I would say to people in that situation is that you have probably Wi-Fi access and a library card. And
Yes,
it's
let's
time
go.
to lose it's time to use those things differently.
Yeah.
Um I went through a phase, this was years ago, where I suddenly realized I am only reading white evangelical leaning authors,
Yeah.
period. Like
Yeah.
outside of maybe fiction, but even the fiction I was reading, I was reading only white authors. And it just hit me like, I wonder I wonder why. Like, I
Yeah.
wonder why I'm doing this. I wonder how I can change it. And so I kept it. I taped a piece of paper to my bedroom wall. Our house is not fancy, and I
I
wrote every title down that I read that year. And I made sure that I did not read two white authors in a row.
love it.
That was my starting point. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Simple.
so it was transformative in a small way that added up over time. I mean, who we're following on social media, the podcasts we're
Mm-hmm.
listening to,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't mean that it even has to be, I mean, I hope it is like, nonfiction stuff that is specifically teaching us something new, but reading poetry, reading cookbooks, reading
Yeah.
like whatever the case may be, like finding different perspectives and
Mm-hmm.
and drawing them into our lives is a step that every single one of us can take today. And
Yeah.
it's impactful.
Yeah. It just helps us. It changes our perspective, right, of people in a
But
new way.
it requires intention. We
Oh,
can't just like
absolutely. Yes.
wish ourselves into that. Like it requires us to acknowledge what is and find just a simple way to fix that. My husband and I, not long after that, I was like, man, you're only reading men. What's up with that?
There
Or
you
I think
go.
I
Yeah.
recommended a specific book to him, and he was kind of like, I just assumed it was for women. And he was basically saying that because it was written by a woman. And
Yeah.
with a wife who is a author, I'm like, I want everybody to be reading my books. But this is like a conditioning thing that happens to us. But it was a moment for him. It was a moment of recognition of, number one, he didn't even notice. Like, this is
Yeah.
just the world he's existed in. And at the point that he noticed, he made changes immediately. Like, he intentionally turned himself into a new direction and started walking.
Mm.
And so that's what it takes for us to do. And it sounds big, but it's like just change the degree a little bit and start
Yep.
walking in that direction, and change comes.
Yeah. Well, it's a way to show that you care about people too. I know I read a
Yeah.
book last year that was definitely written to women and for women, and I gave it to my husband, and I was like, I need you to read this because
Yes.
I need you to understand how this affects me and the way that I think, and I can't explain it to you, but she is explaining it to you, and so
Yeah.
Because you care about me, because you have 2 daughters, I need
Yes.
you to go ahead and read this book.
Well, and I could say a similar thing because I'm the parent. I'm the white mom of 4 non-white kids.
Yeah,
And even that alone, like it's not cool. It's not cool for me to be only and exclusively immersing myself in any representation of myself because that leaves my own family out. I
right.
want representation in my life because it makes the world better. I mean, I want that
Yeah,
for all of us, but
yeah.
also because representation in my life means representation in small ways in my kids' lives. And that's
Mhm.
something that we can kind of grow towards together. It sounds like such a little thing, and it's such a big, it was so transformative in my life and so meaningful and just continued to kind of, it's like your husband reading that book. Corey, I've done the same thing to Corey. And I think once you kind of set that intention, it just cracks things open in a
Yeah,
new
and then
way.
it's easier,
Yeah.
right?
And you want more of it. You realize kind of what you were missing, and it's interesting. And yeah, I mean, it's just a win. It's just a win.
Yeah. We just one more story. So I pastor a I'm one of the pastors at a very, very, very diverse church. But my whole family's white. I'm white, my husband's white,
Yeah.
my girls are white. And I love Mosaic. I love our church. I've been part of our church since its very existence for 19 years. Um, but it wasn't really until we had our own kids that I
Yeah.
realized how easy it was to stay in a little white bubble. And so one day I was just like, Peter, we have to be intentional in changing this. Like, I
Yeah.
say I'm for diversity and I'm, working in this space, and we love these people on Sunday, but loving them on Sunday is not enough.
Yeah.
And so we made some small changes, and is like you said, it's little things that lead to big things. When we had play dates with our kids, we made sure intentionally
Yeah.
that we were bringing diversity into our house. And,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not tokenism. It's not going, oh, let's
Yeah.
make sure we've got like one non-white child at the birthday
Right.
party, but
Right. Right.
investing in them and having that relationship. And so now my girls they actually notice when we go to all white spaces, and they're only
Yeah.
8 and 10, but they'll look
Yeah.
around and be like, huh, this
Yeah.
is weird.
This feels
It's
this
normal
feels
for them.
off. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
my kids from the time they were young, even before, I mean, this is lifelong work. I don't feel like there's ever a time that I can say like I totally get it all, like I've mastered all of this. But
Yeah.
when I was in a much earlier part of my journey, even, my kids always noticed when they were the only non-white person in the room.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I'm
as they got
sure.
older, they were able to vocalize more of the discomfort in that. And that's, again, like these are things that, whether we have, whether that happens to be your family or not, like we all need there to be less of those spaces where when one person comes in, they're immediately uncomfortable. Like we can all
Right.
do things to kind of move ourselves towards difference instead of constantly feeling like we need to move away from it. We
Yeah.
need more of it. We need to get closer.
And we can create those communities if we don't have them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And if you can't, I mean, that's a heavy lift for today. You
Sure.
can't go and create a new community today. You can
It
go to the
takes time.
library. You can
Yes.
go to the
Yeah.
library today because that, like, even through our reading, it kind of it increases some of the friction that we're so afraid
Mhm.
of, and that helps us along that journey.
Yeah. Shannon, one last question for you. And I didn't prep you for this. So if you
Okay.
need a second to think about it, it's fine.
That's fine.
But as we are heading into a very politically divisive, what is going to be a very
Yeah.
tense political season, you have, the background that I don't have and many of us don't have. Is there anything in particular that you want to say to maybe even Jesus followers, to Christians, especially when it comes to this political season, things we should look for, not look for?
Yeah.
I mean, the door's wide
Yeah.
open for anything that you want to say to us there.
I think we should be paying close attention to the language and the words politicians and people are using to talk about other people.
So good.
Um, I think they're like, if we set the standard at perfection or like, our ideal candidate, that's just going to be difficult. But if we can set our bar at like, we're going to pay attention to, I think this is something I talked about in my campaign for little tiny city council. The words we use to describe other people tell us everything. They tell us so
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
And so if we can zero in on that, and not be dismissive of that, not make excuses for the words people use, if we can really interrogate our own willingness to say, this is not, this does not reflect the heart of Jesus,
Yes.
using disparaging, diminishing, hateful language. I mean, that's my like base level encouragement. And then beyond that, I would say we need to keep our heads in the game. We need to stay aware of the process.
Mhm.
Like so many of us, I hear from people all the time, like, I don't even listen to the news. I'm saying we need to.
Yeah.
We can set our boundaries. I mean,
Right.
we have to have boundaries. We've got to be able to sustain, but we need to stay aware of what's going on. And if we're going to do that, because that's hard, it's going to be hard for the next year.
Right.
We also need to find our counterweights, which are things that help us to like, we're holding this heavy thing over here that's really hard. We need to hold really heavy, beautiful things over in this other
Oh,
arm, like to keep us centered, to keep us rooted in our lives that are
yeah.
complicated and beautiful. If we're
Yeah.
going to endure and get through all of this, we've got to kind of stay connected to the hard things in some ways, but we've got to look even harder for the little tiny moments in our days and in our lives and find meaningful ways to create that rich abundance that we need to carry on. And so keeping track, finding a way to keep track. I mean, I'm literally like, keep a list, take pictures, whatever it is, and be able
Yeah.
to say like, this moment right here is sustaining me.
Oh,
This,
that's so
meal with my
lovely.
family, these flowers
Yeah.
growing in my yard. I mean, slowing down enough to notice what's good in our particular lives will help us along the way.
That is so lovely. And you are right. I used to be a person that would run away in from the news or from anything
Yeah.
hard or scary. And a few years ago, yeah, I just was really convicted that like if I'm going to use my voice for good, then I have to know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And that
I
doesn't
mean,
mean I have to be an expert, but I have to be
no,
aware.
yes. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, that's a tactic people use a lot to kind of silence people like, "Oh, well then what would
Hmm.
you do? What's your answer?" You know what? We're not paid to know those answers. We do not have to
Yeah.
be experts to care about what's happening around us. But we know the heartbeat of scripture is love God and love our neighbor,
Yep.
and we
Yep.
cannot love our neighbors if we are keeping our eyes closed to things that affect all of us. Like that's just I'm so convinced that's part of being a good neighbor.
Yeah. Amen. That'll preach, Shannon. Well, thank you so much for being here. I will link up your books and all of your community things and your Substack and all of that in the show notes. Is there any other organization? I know you mentioned one, or is there a way that people can contribute to the community that you are a chef at? Is there anything that we can do to support your
Yeah,
local
that's a
community?
great idea. Yeah, the organization I'm a part of is called the Window Inc. in Goshen,
Okay.
Indiana. It is like a ragtag little. I mean, I'm sure they have ways to donate online. I hope. I'm sure they
We'll
do.
link it up.
And my husband is the chaplain of the Elkhart County Jail Ministry. And so that's a like that has just permeated our lives and changed our lives for the better. And so that's a great way to plug into. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Happy to.
find Start with Hello. That's my most recent book. Here's a copy of it.
There it is.
It's all the things that we've talked about today. Just these really practical ways of finding connection with each other.
All right, friends, thanks so much for being here and listening. I'd love for you to grab Shannon's book, Start with Hello, or help fund the community work that she's doing if you feel led to do that. Or, even better, think about how you can get more involved in your community as you keep becoming the church to the people around you.